by the central core of our movement. I would have to say that it is mutual, striving for mutual negotiation with the federal government. And that meant that any agreement reached between the federal government and the NJC would have to be mutually agreed upon by both the government and, of course, the NJC and the JC community. This principle of negotiation was sacrosanct. It was not subject to further negotiation. No settlement that was not negotiated would have been acceptable in the end. And we're lucky that the federal government saw fit to negotiate the terms of the settlement with us. The other elements of the redress movement, I'll leave you aside for the moment. But once the JC redress movement was settled, one of the things that we, as JC activists, wanted to do was establish redress as a precedent for human rights concerns in the future. And the federal government disagreed with us. Right after the settlement, the Minister of Multiculturalism, John Wiener, announced that the JC settlement was a unique event in Canadian history and would not be repeated, and there would be no more redress settlements. And the federal government took a no redress policy through the late 80s into the early 90s. In 1994, in fact, they made an official statement that there would be no further redress. The problem, of course, is that redress claims don't go away just because somebody says there's no more redress. The communities that are directly affected will continue to lobby, and they did continue to lobby on and on through the 90s. And the government, I don't have all the details of how they conceived of this, but some bureaucrat conceived of a plan to take care of all of the grievances through one program. It was first of all called ACE by the Liberal government. Acknowledgement, Commemoration, Education. And this is a program whereby the federal government would approach various aggrieved communities and establish a series of projects through which they could tell their story and argue the benefit of their experience to the development of Canada. So this was a way the federal government turned around the grievances and turned the JC redress movement inside out, in fact, and established a means of resolving it with no compensation, no apology, no negotiation, and no direct input from the communities aggrieved. And these communities were they were asked to sign these different agreements with the federal government that they would take part in these projects, and in return for it, they would get so much money to undertake historically based projects. That program got shelved when the Conservatives took over from the Liberal government, and the Conservative government resurrected the program in the same format as a National Historical Recognition Program. And through that program, the various redress claims were made with the Ukrainian Canadian community, the Chinese Canadian community, the Italian Canadian community, the South Asian community, the Jewish Canadian community, and did I mention Italian? Yeah. So all of these projects were resolved through this various program, cost the government $25 million. So redress was supposedly put to bed, but it couldn't be put to bed with the enormity of the injustices experienced by the residential school students. And so redress remained in the public domain, very much so through the work of the Assembly of First Nations and the work of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Affairs that completed this project, this report in 1996. And in this report, advocating some form of redress for the residential school students who were abused through the system. And I only have 8 minutes, so I'm going to just conclude with in comparing JC redress to the Indian Residential School Agreement, we would have to take into account the different effects and the effects on the status of citizenship This is important for JC redress, citizenship as value. In seeking redress, JCs place a lot of emphasis on citizenship values, but from an Aboriginal position, external to the frame of this aspect of Japanese Canadian redress, the same citizenship, membership in the Canadian nation state, represents the very constitution of the power and the authority of the nation state to place in subordination questions of indigenous sovereignty, self-government, land occupancy, and cultural autonomy. Almost 2 decades separate the Japanese-Canadian Redress Agreement and the Indian Residential School Agreement signed in 2006. In that span of time, in Canadian context, what Henderson and Wakem call a culture of redress took formation, in which various cases for redress were brought forth, discussed, and resolved. But this was no means an easily identifiable culture as such, but more a highly fraught and constantly shifting field of discursive forces that were negotiated by complex interchanges between citizen activist groups and various state representatives, which included the changing faces of politicians who often used the language of redress in ways that suited their political ambitions and not necessarily the cause of justice. The government, for its part, then devised what I would consider a somewhat cunning approach to resolve all the claims, excepting for residential school abuse, through a single program called ACE, which I described already. And then let me just make a conclusion by saying that redress from the outset should be accepted and approached as a principle that is open to multiple forms of enactment. This is not a template for injustices, but a principle to guide discussions. There is no predetermined template, but each resolution of an injustice needs to be worked out according to the conditions of its occurrence and the subjectivities of those affected. The lessons learned from JC redress is that it is crucial that those who are directly affected by the injustice assume a central role in negotiating the terms of settlement that respects, honors, and does justice to their experiences. Alternatively, and on a cautionary note, that an assessment of any given redress settlement can require some critical awareness of its limits. And the limits for Japanese Canadians is that it was based upon Canadian citizenship and the violation of those citizenship rights. Which is why we made such a strong emphasis upon individual claims. I'll have to read that sentence. I'll end on a cautionary note that any assessment of any given settlement can require some critical awareness of its limits, and how what the legacy of JC redress can be seen both to enable and restrict the terms of the settlement, as in the case of the individual payments termed common experience payments in the Indian residential school settlement. According to my source on this, my brother, Art, who was consulted by the large committee that drafted the terms of the Indian Residential School Settlement Act. The ex gratia payments, the $21,000 payments made to JCs, was seen as a precedent for the lump sum payments made to those who attended a residential school, $10,000 for the first year and $3,000 for each additional year. Here we can see that the clash of value systems that obscured the very different conditions have resulted in the violation of rights. Using the value of individual citizenship, JCs sought to diffuse their common categorization as enemy aliens and to validate themselves as individuals who were wrong. The same individuation process works against acknowledgement of the collective conditions operating in the residential school system, i.e. a system that was part of the colonial objective to dispossess indigenous nations and destroy their cultural values and practices. Here, the form of the settlement includes the conditions that resulted in the injustices. I point that out as an important point in any comparison of any redress agreement with another redress agreement. There are always distinctions and limits that prohibit an easy comparison. What enables in one sense of situations can disable in another situation. Or in the words of legal scholar Jennifer Llewellyn, quote, the harm caused by residential schools cannot be understood in individualistic terms. It is not limited to the individual and cannot be fully comprehended through attention to the individual. The harm extends to the victims' families and communities and it continues in the second and sometimes third generation of Aboriginal children.